All right, let's talk through identifying and negating quantified statements. So let's first look at what does that mean. Oh, there we go. Quantified statements. What is a quantified statement? Because if you don't know what that is, it's hard to negate that, right? So a quantified statement is any statement that contains one or more quantifiers. So we're not like any brain surgery happening here. If you have a statement that contains a quantifier, you have a quantified statement. So what are some quantifiers? Well, when you think about the word quantity, we're talking about numbers, right? So quantifiers imply that you have value. So all is a quantifier. Some, none, those types of words are quantifiers. So we are going to play with those all, some, none in the examples here. So before we get to this, let's also look at equivalent statements. So if I talk about statements that are equivalent, what does equivalent mean? It means the same, right? So when we talk about quantified statements can be written in multiple ways that mean the same thing. So that's where we talk about equivalent statements. So two things written differently, but meaning the same thing. So let's do that. So writing an equivalent statement. Some dogs like playing in mud. That is the statement. Now, if you think about an equivalent statement, we can't say all dogs like playing in mud because they don't. We know that only some dogs. So we could say not all dogs like playing in mud, right? Because that's the same. If we know that some do, that's not all. Then we could also say not all dogs do not like playing in mud because some dogs do, right? So we have two different ways of writing an equivalent statement. And you'll notice that we use the word not, which kind of implies a negation. So let's talk about negating a quantified statement. So if we have a quantified statement, which is just a statement with a quantifier, we can negate that. Now, what that means is that either statement or negation must be true, but not both. Now, what that means is if you start with a statement that is true, when you negate that, it must become false. Or the other way around. If you start with a statement that is false and then you negate it, it must turn it true. So your statement and the negation, one must be true, one must be false. All right, so let's look at some examples. We're going to negate some quantified statements. Now, when we do that, this is kind of let's look at our basics before we get to examples. Sorry, I get excited. So if I would say all A are B, the negation of that would be some A are not B. Okay, so one of those is true, one of those is false. That's kind of the deal. Now the wording goes the other direction as well. If I say some A are B, where A and B can be anything, right? Some men are brown-haired. The negation of that would be all men are not brown-haired. Woo! Right? So that's kind of how it works when you put real things in for A and B. It makes a little bit more sense. But that's kind of your cheat sheet. If you have these wordages written down, it will help you negate some quantified statements when we throw in some real words. So let's do that. Our first statement that we are going to negate is that all cats have 9 lives. Now we are going to negate that. We can't just say no cats have 9 lives because some might, right? So the negate of that would be the negation. Some cats do not have 9 lives would be the negation of all. So the opposite of all is in fact some. It's not none, it's some. So all cats have 9 lives. The negation of that is some cats do not have 9 lives. One of those is true, one of those is false. Example 3, negate the following statement. Some hits are home runs. Yeah. So let's negate that. All hits are not home runs. Okay? So those would be negating the statements. When you talk about some, right, some A are B, that would be, the negation would then be all A are not B. And that is the idea of identifying and negating quantified statements.